Well, hello. My name is John Bonner. I'm a missionary, a pastor, and the director of Calvary Chapel Bible College in Cajamarca, Peru, in South America. I am honored that you would listen to my unique testimony, and I pray that it would be a blessing and an encouragement to you. Chapter 3: The Desert of Alamos. Who has despised the day of small things? Zechariah 4:10. The desert is where Moses had an encounter with God through the burning bush, where David learned to use a sling and to fight wild animals, where Jesus was tempted, where Paul went to be retrained, where John was placed in exile. The desert is where one comes to the end of himself and where true ministry begins. Anyone wanting to be used of the Lord must first die in the desert. January 1981, Alamos, Mexico. The desert of failure. My great sprint to the mission field was interrupted by Dad's untimely death. It was important to take care of Mom now and help her adjust to widowhood. She decided this was a good time to move to northern Arizona, where my eldest brother Larry was living. The historic town of Flagstaff, bordering the Navajo Nation Indian Reservation with its pristine air, ponderosa pine forest, and majestic 7,000-foot San Francisco peaks, seemed like a wonderful place for Mom to retire and begin a new life. I found a modest $5 an hour job raking pine needles in a local campsite park in the Coconino National Forest. It was one of the best jobs I have ever had, even though it offered a small fraction of what I earned at the phone company. God was weaning me from greed and my love of money. I was able to listen to Bible study tapes as I worked, carrying the battery-powered cassette recorder from table to table in the park's many campsites. It was a special time of growth in the Lord and in His Word. After a year, Mom was pretty much established, and I decided to go to Bible school in the beautiful San Bernardino Mountains of Southern California. I was wonderfully surprised when I arrived. Some of my favorite teachers from my time at Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa were now a part of the staff. The examples and teaching ministries of T. Thornton and David Grisanti especially left a tremendous impact on my life. It was there that I became acquainted with true worship. Someone invited me to a spontaneous, informal time of prayer and singing. "We'll be meeting on the stage in the auditorium in 10 minutes, a friend said. 20 of us, one with a guitar, sat in a circle in the near total darkness of the auditorium and began lifting our hands and hearts to the Lord. It was beautiful. The words of the song became our prayers to God, and His presence became very real to each one of us. I was learning about intimacy in worship. I learned about practical Christian service. Each student was required to serve 8 hours weekly in addition to his studies. My assignment was washing dishes in the school's industrial kitchen. I had a very close relationship with the stainless steel Hobart dishwasher. I felt like I owned the machine. My kitchen duty extended beyond the spring semester as I worked split shifts with Hobart throughout the summer. God was teaching me humility and servanthood. The teaching was rich. I marked up my Bible with class notes from Hebrews, the book of Joshua, 1st and 2nd Kings, and various books of the minor prophets. The fresh pine-scented forest air, the wood-burning fireplace, the fellowship, the delicious food, and the purity of the Word. I loved it all. Near the end of the semester, I received a call from Frank Robles at the language school in Alamos, Mexico, asking me if I would like to return to the school, except this time to teach Spanish. I felt this was my open door to return to the mission field. I jumped at the opportunity. Back in high school, my advisor told me that because I had failed Level 1 Spanish, I had to repeat the class in order to get a better grade. I hated language and could not even comprehend English grammar, much less the seemingly endless verb conjugations of a foreign language. I asked her why I had to learn Spanish, saying, After all, I'm never going to use it. Back when I was attending Acacia Baptist Church, the Lord allowed me to meet and fall in love with a wonderful family of believers from Mexico. Vicky Morales and her 3 daughters adopted me into their family, and almost nightly we sat around the kitchen table eating tacos, sopes, huaraches, or mole. They spoke unceasingly about their beloved Mexico, teaching me the nuances of Mexican civilization and language. When they shipped me off to Mexico City to stay with La Familia, I found myself mesmerized, enamored with the food, culture, and fascinating history of Mexico. This is where I wanted to live. This gringo was becoming a Mexican. Vicky insisted that I learn Spanish. I began to pick it up as a child would, a much easier method than in the classroom. I promptly learned how to tackle Spanish-speaking calls when I was a telephone operator, and soon the whole office began sending me their Spanish-speaking customers. So when I went to Alamos, I was somewhat conversant and willing to give it a try, but I really just wanted to live in Mexico. As I attempted to teach the language school students nouns, adjectives, pronouns, and verb conjugations, they looked bored. I was fooling no one. They knew the rules of grammar better than I did. I was unprepared for what I was doing, and it showed. I loathed learning Spanish in a classroom in high school, and now I hated teaching it in a classroom. I had learned Spanish differently, with friends, in soccer matches, and around the kitchen table over food, not from a boring textbook. My pupils had paid their hard-earned money to learn Spanish, and all they got was me. One thing that I loved about the Alamos ministry, besides Betty Robles' incredible cooking, was traveling out to the 100-acre ranch property. The dirt road took us back in time as we greeted friendly Yaqui and Tarahumara Indians on the half-day trek. We helped the locals by working in the anjojolí harvest, cutting sesame stalks with machetes for hours on end in the hot Sonoran sun. In the late afternoons, we would visit El Cajon, a box canyon creek complete with natural waterfalls, and enjoy swimming with the students and staff. After diving from the cliffs, I would lay on my back on the sun-warmed rocks and spy brightly colored macaw parrots flying free high above. I can still taste those thick homemade tortillas, the bean burritos, and delicious lemonade made from the property's lone, overloaded lemon tree. Así es la vida. Each semester, Frank would teach the missionary students the importance of living by faith. He would send us out on weekend missions trips to develop our faith muscles. He would give us just a few pesos and send us in all directions to trust the Lord. My adventure took me to Hermosillo, the capital of Sonora, and then west to the coast and the beautiful Gulf of California. I got off the bus in Hermosillo and started to walk across town. At a traffic signal, I walked behind a pickup truck filled with young people. One called out to me and asked if I was a Christian. I told him yes, and he told me that they were driving around town witnessing for Jesus. He extended his hand as if to pull me into the truck, asking, "Do you want to come with us?" I said, "Sure." And the light turned green. I was already seated in the truck bed with the others. I had no idea who I was with or what I was doing. We visited tall apartment complexes and preached to people using a megaphone. We stood outside bars, too, where the young people began rebuking the evil spirits. This very charismatic group did things much differently than I was accustomed to, but they sure loved Jesus. Soon it was dinner time and time to turn in. I found myself sleeping comfortably that night in a living room filled with about 15 Mexican brothers whom I had just met that afternoon. God was providing. I didn't even have to pay for a hotel room that night. Early the next day, I said goodbye to my new friends and headed to the fishing town of Bahia de Quino. It was late afternoon and a damp fog covered the beaches when I arrived. I brought a tattered paperback tourist guide with me from the language school and highlighted an inexpensive hotel where I planned to stay the evening. The book said that the room was only 20 pesos, and since I did not have to pay for lodging the previous night, I figured I had money to spare. I found the hotel, entered, and went up to register. "Señor, your room will be 200 pesos, the young manager informed me. I explained to the man behind the counter that I did not have that much money, and the tour book said it would only cost 20 pesos per night. He asked me how old the book was, and we looked. It was published 10 years earlier. Well, our prices have gone up since 1971. I asked him if he knew any cheaper hotels in town, and he said no. I knew the next bus to Hermosillo wouldn't leave until morning, so I was stuck. I had to stay the night in Quino. I thanked him and walked outside to the damp cold and impending darkness. I adjusted my jacket and started heading towards the row of upturned fishing vessels along the beach. I figured I'd be sleeping under one of those boats. I took about 10 steps and the door flew open. "Hey gringo," yelled the hotel manager. "You can stay the night with me in my room. I won't charge you." That evening I was able to share Jesus with that man that I was truly grateful for. I returned to Alamos the next day rejoicing in God's provision and for the many opportunities He gave me to share that weekend. It was in Alamos that I gave my first devotional Bible study. I cheated. I listened to a Chuck Missler cassette on the Book of Ruth and simply repeated his excellent teaching. The students and staff warmly congratulated me on a great message, but inside I knew I had heard it on a recorded tape. The language school students tried their best to encourage me in my first teaching job. I was over my head and wondered how the Lord was ever going to get me through this. I often wondered if Frank had regretted extending the invitation to teach. I made many mistakes and would retire each night reminding God that I would not mind not waking up in the morning. They say the desert experience is necessary for those aspiring to be in ministry. That is where godly character is forged. The desert is part of the breaking process, fashioning the person God will eventually use. Those whom God has used in the past have had to endure it. Moses, David, Elijah, Paul, and even Jesus had their humble beginnings in the desert. The prophet Zechariah says we should not despise the days of small things. I consider my time in Alamos as a time of breaking and a time of failure. In mid-December, Frank announced that Juan Domingo had arrived overnight from Mexico City and was driving on to San Diego for Christmas. The good work that he was doing in the Mexican capital made Juan a legend before his time. I could not wait to meet him. I had been to Mexico City twice and hoped to return to live there someday. How I wished I could work with Juan, but I had made a year-long commitment in Alamos. The purpose of my desert experience in Alamos, other than to break me and humble me, was perhaps to be a stepping stone to the place I was really called to minister. Certainly, Frank sensed my frustration and freed me from my commitment. He said, "Juanito, when Juan Domingo returns to Alamos from the States in early January, I want you to accompany him on his way back to Mexico City." I was so excited. I was going back to a city that I loved, with a man that God was using tremendously, and best of all, I was freed from the burden of having to teach Spanish. Hallelujah. Juan agreed to Frank's suggestion and said he could use my help with his correspondence for 2 weeks. That 14-day stint turned into 5 wonderful and fruitful years in Mexico City. Juan and I soon headed south in his white VW van, and he pulled a cassette tape out of a huge supply of tapes between the seats. We listened non-stop to Chuck Smith's Bible studies on the 3-day trip to his home in Colonia Industrial in the heart of Mexico's Distrito Federal. The myth of coincidence. God will use our failures to alter our course and get us going in the right direction. Alamos was used to break me, and it became a stepping stone towards the ministry He wanted me to be a part of. Was it a coincidence that Juan would be visiting Alamos at the same moment I was struggling? Was it a coincidence that Frank would send me with Juan? David was a man who made plenty of mistakes, yet the Lord always seemed to use his errors for God's ultimate good. He committed adultery with Bathsheba and even had her husband killed to cover up the affair when it was discovered that she was pregnant with David's child. Their son died shortly after childbirth, but David and Bathsheba's next baby, Solomon, became the next king of Israel. God is so gracious that He takes our major blunders and makes something beautiful with our mess afterwards. You may also feel like a failure, frustrated by the many errors you make. Know that God is using this time as a time of preparation. Watch for the open doors the Lord will present you to get you going in the right direction. Note what has been your desert experience. What divine providence have you observed in your life that proves that coincidence is just a myth?